Thank you very much, James, and good morning, everyone. You have been lulled into a little bit of sleep, it seems. I'll try that again. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. So I was thinking about the conversation about Pokemon Go that has carried a little bit through this morning, and that mention of being on the board of MediaCorp. Is I think whenever you're in a field and you're trying to understand what the future will look like, you always want to try to experience the fringes. The great science fiction author William Gibson once said, "The future has already arrived, it's just not very evenly distributed." And I'm very happy and proud to be the father of 3 children. They bring a lot of joy to me, and they are great uses for business as well. Because if I want to understand the future of media, I just watch what my 10-year-old son, 8-year-old daughter, 4-year-old son, not really that much yet, are doing. And my 10-year-old son in particular, we're talking about at the table here, you notice something very interesting about the way he consumes media. He doesn't watch traditional linear television. All of his viewing is YouTube. He is obsessed with this guy, Dan TDM. He's some guy from England who plays Minecraft and narrates playing Minecraft. And my son will sit and watch this for hours. Dan TDM has 8 million followers around the globe. I don't totally understand it, but if you're in the media business, this is what the future will be like. It'll take a couple decades before it fully permeates, but the future is going to be very different than today. Every industry, every part of our global economy is changing, and we need to understand what we as leaders do in the face of these changes. So what I'm going to share with you this morning are some remarks that are tied to a book that I and a couple people are in the process of finishing, scheduled to be published next April by Harvard Business Review Press with this title, Dual Transformation, Strengthen Today, Create Tomorrow. The way I want to introduce the remarks is tell you about the first time that I, as an individual, came face to face with what would be called ultimately by experts a disruptive change in an industry. This is going to go back to a time when I was the managing editor of a daily newspaper. I will take you back in time to the year 1994. Now you can probably quickly see from looking at this picture that I was not at the Wall Street Journal or USA Today or any major national or international publication. No, I was the managing editor of my college newspaper. I went to a small school in the United States called Dartmouth College, located in Hanover, New Hampshire. Anyone here ever been to Hanover, New Hampshire by chance? One person ever. What do you remember about Hanover? Remarkably small. Yes, it's a town where the closest major city is about 2 hours away. Boston's the closest big city. It is a beautiful town. The town has about 10,000 people in it. We put out a daily newspaper Monday through Friday covering hot happenings like town considering adding a second stoplight, which it did. It was a big deal. Or this one, moose on the loose in the cafeteria, which actually did happen at Dartmouth. So there wasn't much that went on there, but we took our jobs as editors seriously. We had a staff of about 50 people, mostly volunteers, and we put this newspaper out every day. 1994 ended up being a seminal year in the media industry. A couple things happened that year. Who remembers this picture? Who's driving that white Ford Bronco? O.J. Simpson. This was a big deal in media. This was the first time the cable news networks went from doing what they were supposed to do, which is cover news, to provide minute-by-minute, second-by-second coverage of something that honestly did not matter very much. And you turn on televisions today, you replace O.J. with Donald Trump, and that's what you get. That will be my only Donald Trump reference, I promise. You get wall-to-wall coverage of stuff that really doesn't matter that much anymore. The media landscape has changed. An even more important thing happened at the end of 1994 when Mark Andreessen and his team introduced this, the Netscape browser. For the first time, the layperson could access the World Wide Web. So there we were, a leadership team confronting a disruptive change in our industry. We had to, like all of you, decide what do we do in the face of that change? Well, the first thing we did was nothing. We weren't excited about this. We weren't optimistic about this. We were terrified about the internet. Our business model rested on selling subscriptions, $250,000 US a year, 2/3 of which came from subscriptions. Even today, people haven't figured out how to charge for content online. So appropriately, we were nervous. We got over that. After all, we were college students. It's the time in your life when you can take wild and crazy risks. You can go and do very different things. You have no board of directors. You have no shareholders. You can go and reinvent, reimagine, reconfigure your business. We did none of those things. Instead, once a week, we would go and find the stories in the print newspaper that we liked the most, and we would create word for word, pixel for pixel replications of them online. You might not quite be able to see it, but the reason we did this wasn't to drive in new directions, but to get people, no laser pointer here. If you see on the left side of the page, there is a big green button that says subscribe to the D. To get people to subscribe to the print version of the newspaper. Rather than reinventing, we tried to force fit the new technology through the lens of our business model. I would later learn when I studied with Clayton Christensen at the Harvard Business School, the father of the idea of disruptive innovation, that this is what gets market leaders in trouble. A disruptive change comes into their market, and the first thing they do is underinvest in it. When they decide to invest in it, they mismanage the investment. How did it work out for us and the rest of the newspaper industry? Not particularly well. This is one of the more stunning charts you will see showing the impact of disruptive change. Note, my story began in 1994, and the world didn't end immediately. It never does. The next 12 years were actually quite good for the US newspaper industry. There's a little bit of a boom-bust cycle, but you draw a trend line, and the 55 years of growth that started in 1950 continued. Around 2006-07, the industry falls off a cliff, and 55 years of growth are eviscerated in 5 short years. Now, this used to be a phenomena that was confined to a very small number of industries that featured technologies, but increasingly, this is the world in which everyone lives. One of the long-standing pieces of research we have done is tracking the turnover in the S&P 500, the largest, most powerful publicly traded companies on US markets. The chart on the left shows the lifespan of companies, expected lifespan of companies on that index today. You note that it goes up and down, again tied to the business cycle, but inexorably, lifespans are getting shorter. Current trends continue, and we predict that 50% of the companies on the S&P 500 will not be there in 10 years. What will happen to them? Well, like the last 10 years, some of them will go bankrupt, like Kodak. Others will just shrink and become less relevant. US Steel, one of the original members of any list of big companies in the United States, last year finally fell off the S&P 500 index. It still exists, but it is an insignificant company today. Who will replace those companies? Perhaps it will be companies like Under Armour that take the next step in their development. Even more likely, it will be companies that do not exist today. Facebook is 12 years old and is now one of the 10 most valuable companies in the world. This is the reality that all of us as business leaders are facing. If you're a fan of Game of Thrones or the book on which it's based, you know the Stark family has a saying, winter is coming. It is not winter that is coming to your businesses, it is disruption. Each and every one of you will have to confront, through digitalization and other technologies, things that threaten to fundamentally undermine, fundamentally affect the business that you have known and loved. What that means you have to do, fundamentally, existentially, is to transform your business. Now, this is a word that has increasingly entered the business lexicon. And often when we hear people use it, often combined with the word digital, they're not really talking about true transformation. Instead, they're talking about something like this. Kylie Jenner undergoes dramatic transformation, ditching dark hair for blonde locks. I am sure that was a really big deal for Kylie and the rest of her family, but that's not really something that fundamentally changes the nature or essence of a business. As I mentioned before, you always learn from the fringes, you always learn from the edges, you always learn from the periphery. What we have learned about transformation comes not from Kylie Jenner, but from this guy here, Clark Gilbert. It's kind of a quirky story, but in Gilbert's story comes a simple equation that can help you as a leader think about how to rise to the existential challenge of disruptive change. So let me tell you about Clark. I first met Clark in 2000. In the year 2000, he was a professor at the Harvard Business School. He had done his doctoral study on how incumbents should respond to disruptive change. He specifically focused on the US newspaper industry. He gave very clear advice to what the industry should do. He's a member of our board of advisors, so we've worked with him over the past 15 years. In the years 2004 to 2007, he and I consulted to a range of US newspaper companies to give them the playbook for responding to disruptive change. Nobody listened. You can see what happened to those companies. In 2008, Clark got a tap on the shoulder to go and become the CEO of a small media company in the state of Utah in the United States, about a $150 million company. Everyone in the industry laughed. They said the academic will learn what the reality of our industry is like. That business, like all media companies, was shrinking. Clark left in 2015. He had taken that shrinking company and transformed it into a growth company. And the way that he did it gives you a playbook for how to respond to disruptive change. He did two things together. He took the core traditional business, print newspaper, broadcast television, and transformed them. Found new ways to compete at lower price points, changed the way that he produced content, changed the way that he focused his publication, took something that was shrinking and now has the fastest growing print publication in North America. While he transformed what he was doing today and strengthened it, he simultaneously created a portfolio of digital market space businesses, community platforms, related to moms and faith and family and other issues that he decided would be the focal point of his business. By executing this strategy that we now call dual transformation, he was able to take the disruptive shock to his business and turn it into a growth opportunity. So let me walk you through the three letters that define dual transformation. They're simple to remember, A, B, and C. I'm then going to talk a little bit about the leadership characteristics that you need to drive a dual transformation, and then conclude my remarks with a picture from one of my favorite movies of all time. So the A in our framework, very simple, transformation A. This is about strengthening today's business. How many of you have heard of this company here, Netflix? How many of you are Netflix subscribers? Through Optus, I hope. So a bunch of Netflix subscribers in the room here. Those of you who don't know the origins of the business, it's about a 20-year-old business. When Reed Hastings started the business, pretty simple idea. The DVD format was just emerging. So the idea was, instead of going to the corner video store and renting a cassette, you get a DVD sent to you through the mail. It actually wasn't that innovative a business model in the early days. Just like Blockbuster Video, if you were late returning your video, you paid a late fee. Everything looked the same, but through the mail. In 1997, Hastings executed the first shift of his business strategy, where instead of having people rent individual movies and charge late fees if they didn't return them, he said you can have all the movies you want in a given month, paying a flat monthly subscription rate, as long as you don't hold too many at one given time. A hugely disruptive model to the industry, because most market leaders made almost all of their profits from late fees. And from that beginning, he began a massive change in that industry. Over the past few years, Netflix has fundamentally reinvented its core business. What does Netflix do today that is different from what it did in the past? This is not a trick question. So Netflix's core business is DVD rentals through the mail. What does Netflix do today? So you have two things that you've talked about. First is the way that you enjoy the content. You're not getting DVDs sent through the mail from some mail order place in the United States. No, you're watching streaming video. This is a fundamental change, not in what Netflix is providing. It's doing the same thing it did before, entertainment and media, but the way in which it is doing it, streaming content as opposed to DVDs through the mail. It also has changed the very content that it's producing. It used to be entirely third-party content, but a few years ago, Netflix said, we understand our customers better than anybody else. Rather than have a crapshoot in how new content is produced, we can algorithmically predict the sorts of things that people will like. Then you get Kevin Spacey in House of Cards, Orange is the New Black, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So with those two changes, Netflix has taken what Blockbuster said was an interesting but small niche business that wasn't worth paying $50 million for in 1999 and turned it into a global powerhouse. This is transformation A. You're in the same business, you're doing the same basic thing for the end customer, but the way in which you're doing it, your underlying business model, is fundamentally changing. The very simple litmus test for whether you are undergoing a transformation A is to ask this question. Are the metrics by which you're measuring and managing your business changing? If they're not, you're improving operations, you might be better, faster, cheaper, but you are not fundamentally reinventing yourself. This is a worry, by the way, we have about many companies that say they're undergoing a digital transformation. What we observe many of them doing is taking fax machines and replacing them with email, or email and replacing it with messaging, not fundamentally rethinking what they're doing what they were doing before a little bit differently. So this is the A part of the equation, fundamentally changing today's business. The B part of the equation, transformation B, not complicated. A is strengthening today, B is creating tomorrow. Taking the disruptive trends that threaten to undermine your core business and turning them into an exciting growth opportunity. I think a company that has demonstrated throughout its history the ability to drive its business in new directions is Amazon. You go back a dozen years ago and you predict that in the year 2016, today, Amazon was going to be the world's largest provider of cloud computing services, and people would have laughed. Amazon hadn't figured out how to make its core retail business work, and people would say it's going to compete with people like IBM and Microsoft and Wipro and Accenture. Today, of course, you know the answer is clearly yes. And this isn't a business that Amazon is bleeding cash in. Amazon is making substantial margins in this business that's running at about $3 billion in revenue a quarter, almost 10% of Amazon's business today. Amazon took some of its internal capabilities, its ability to run its websites, its ability to run its operations, and turned it into an exciting growth opportunity. This is transformation B, going and finding new markets to get into, taking advantage of disruption and driving in new directions. The simple litmus test we have for this is to ask the question, are the people with which you are competing changing? If you're competing against the same people, you're not playing a fundamentally new game. Think about Amazon. Historically, it would compete with other retailers. It might be Walmart or Borders or other people selling things. In the field of cloud services, it of course has a completely different competitive set. Now, I'm willing to bet 2 years from now, when you remember this breakfast, maybe not even 2 years, let's do 2 months. 2 months from now, when you remember this breakfast, the recall for Transformation A and Transformation B will be high. It's easy, it's intuitive, people remember it. The most important part of the framework, and the one that is subtle and easy to forget, is the C in it. This is not unrelated diversification. This is not going and placing bets in completely disconnected markets. The C is the very careful, very conscious capabilities link between today and tomorrow. The example that I use to illustrate this is one of my favorite case studies showing the power of incumbency. Now, when we think about innovation today, we often think about startup companies. You hear about unicorns that are prancing unabated, privately held companies worth more than $1 billion. Startups are great. Startups can have huge impact on the world. But incumbents, too, can do incredibly powerful things when they combine together the assets that only they have with just enough entrepreneurial energy. This is what the medical device company Medtronic did in India. Now, for those of you who don't know Medtronic, it is the world's largest medical device company. Its flagship product is the pacemaker, a device that regulates the flow of electricity to your heart. India should have been one of its biggest markets because India, sadly, has more heart disease than any country in the world. Yet, Medtronic's sales in that country historically were minuscule. You spend 5 minutes in India, you understand. People in India pay for healthcare out of their own pockets. A $1,000 device is simply unaffordable to them. Primary care doesn't work that well in India, so even if you needed a pacemaker, you didn't know it. Medtronic solved the problem, not by inventing a new pacemaker, that takes decades, but by coming up with a new business model. Three key components to it. Direct-to-consumer marketing, like this truck that you see here. Diagnostic camps, where in an afternoon 300 people could be diagnosed rapidly. Most critically, displayed on the chart here, or on the picture here, if you could read the local dialect, the world's first loan program for an implantable medical device. Think about that for a second. You give someone a loan to get a car or to buy a house, and they don't pay it back? No problem. You repossess. You give someone a loan for a device that gets implanted in their chest, and they don't pay it back? It's a little bit harder to recollect. But Medtronic figured out a way around this problem, drafting on principles, micro-lending, and other things, using community pressure, to the point where today, this program has been in existence for 5 years. Tens of thousands of people have gone through it. Hundreds of people at subsistence levels of income have gotten loans, and none of them have defaulted. The thing that I find so powerful about this story is I could tell you every single thing Medtronic did, and you couldn't replicate it. It is something that only Medtronic and maybe one other company in the world could do. This is the C part of the equation, picking unfair fights, finding the things that make you truly unique and using them as assets to go into new markets and new spaces. Because this is so important, yet so subtle, I wanted to spend just a couple minutes talking about this, then I'll talk about the key leadership characteristics of driving dual transformation. So 5 keys to getting this capabilities link between today and tomorrow right. First, be very selective. Many of the things that you perceive to be capabilities in your core actually won't help you do new things. Think about the things that really make your competitors jealous or would make a startup company envious. Second, be very vigilant. There are lots of hidden ways that the core DNA can, in unintentional ways, can infiltrate some of your new growth businesses and slow them down and make it harder for them to succeed. I want to show you an example of this by showing you a very short video. This is an idea that Procter & Gamble, big consumer packaged goods company, was playing with about a decade ago. Anyone happen to know what P&G's biggest global brand is? So I heard some of the detergents. It's not some of its detergents. It's not shampoos. Shampoos, the detergents are in the upper single, so it's about 8 billion in the detergent. Shampoos are about 4 or 5 billion. It's not their blades and razors, which are about that level as well. It's Pampers, nappies, diapers, depending on where you're from. It's now about a $12 billion global business. So a team at Procter & Gamble had an idea to do something very different. Here is the idea, called Change and Go. So you get the basic idea, right? Disaggregate the diaper into 2 parts. You have a removable part, you have a core part. Just for those of you wondering, this is only meant to be used when the baby urinates in the diaper. If the baby does something else, you still have to change the diaper. So you look like a pretty smart group of people. Imagine this idea came to you from an internal team, and they said, I want money to go and launch this business. What questions would you ask? What are the uncertainties behind this? What would you worry about if you were investing in this? So you are potentially cannibalizing yourself by doing this. So you'd worry a lot. Will this be additive to our business? Is it going to be replacative, if that's a word, to our business? What else would you worry about? So will the technology actually work? Always a big question. P&G is really good at the technology, so it was quite confident that it'd be able to solve it. But it is a question that you'd want to make sure that you got right. What else would you worry about in the back there? Is it easy to replicate? So do you have proprietary technology that would give you space against Kimberly-Clark, who's the other big player in this space? What else would you worry about? Consumer adoption, that's a pretty big deal, right? This is a different habit for a consumer. Is the mother actually going to do it? All legitimate questions. None of you asked the question, if all of these things are true, if the technology works, if it doesn't cannibalize, if consumers will adopt, is the Pampers brand a good brand for it? Almost unquestionable. The Pampers brand is one of the world's best brands. But because this team was thinking about going into a very small trial market with that brand on it, they were stuck. Because you don't put that brand on anything. No, to put that brand on something requires going through 3 different review committees, different advertising agencies. You got to get the Pantone color exactly right. And that wasn't the right question to ask. When you borrow things like brands, when you use things like the tools that exist in your core business, it's a great way to slow down innovation inside your organization. Be focused. The people working on A do A, the people working on B do B. Leadership can stand astride those two, but if you ask people on teams to do both, they will do neither well. Be structured. Think about ways to manage the interchange or the points of interface between today and tomorrow, different ways to do that. And finally, be active. As Gilbert drove transformation in his first organization, Deseret Media, and is now doing it now for a major university, this is where he spends his time, on that interface and boundary between A and B. Not delegated down in the organization, but something that he, as a leader, actively drives. So there it is, the basic dual transformation equation. A is strengthening today, B is creating tomorrow, C is flipping the historical innovator's dilemma and turning it into an opportunity. Clark describes this as the hardest problem in business today, and he is right. Because if you're going to do this, you have to lead in a very particular way. First, you have to have the courage to choose before the platform burns. The guy pictured down there is Stephen Elop. Stephen Elop became the CEO of Nokia, asked to save that company as it was facing a lot of changes in its industry as Apple, Google, and others began to improve. He wrote a memo called the Burning Platform Memo, describing how Nokia was standing on the proverbial burning platform. If you don't know the story, it's actually based, I've heard, on a true story. Someone wakes up on an oil rig, the platform is on fire. They're in the North Sea, they have no choice, so they go to the edge of the platform and they jump in icy cold water. Miraculously, they are saved. Elop writes that memo and says Nokia is in the same position and we've got to do something bold. He wrote this memo in 2011. By the time you are on a burning platform, the game is over. Because your choices as a leader are either to get burnt to a crisp or to jump and pray. Those are not particularly good choices. When you're in the middle of a business that's doing well, it's hard to see the initial sparks. I want to play a short video here, an interview with a guy named Jim Balsillie, who is the co-CEO of another historical market leader in the mobile device industry, a company called Research in Motion, otherwise known as BlackBerry. This video is from April 2008.
Hey everybody, say hello to Mr. Jim Balsillie. How is it that you have the same one that I have? Shouldn't you have some fancy James Bond version?
You're living the dream, man.
Doesn't even have a camera. You don't have the camera one. How are things going?
Things are really good, thanks. Yeah, excellent.
Did you imagine all the things that have sort of changed in your life in the last 10 or 15 years?
A lot less has changed than you would think. Really, a very normal life, kind of. It's just a whole lot more zeros on everything.
Yeah. Which is great if the decimal point's in the right place. You know. Where Rin has gone in the last, did you have a moment where you thought, okay, I think we've reached, we're here?
Not a lot, really. I don't sort of think that way. I don't sort of look up too much. I don't look down too much. It's the great fun is doing what you do every day, and I'm sort of a poster child for not sort of doing anything but what we do, every day. So, no, I don't really think about it a lot. No.
Do you get the sense that at this point, with what the BlackBerry itself, that device has done for your company, that it's a matter of time before other people, like the iPhone didn't really do it. Do you ever look at it and go, what are we going to do if this isn't our primary business, growing Rim beyond something like a BlackBerry?
No. Probably die.
That'll just be
we're a very poorly diversified portfolio. It either goes to the moon or it crashes to Earth. So, but it's making it to the moon pretty good. So
sure, totally
stay with it.
Go to the moon or crash to Earth, the stock is down 99% since that video aired. So the courage to choose before the platform burns. The contrast here is Mark Bertolini, the top picture there, CEO of Aetna, a large health insurance company in the United States. He takes over as CEO in 2011. It would have been easy just to ride off into the sunset over the next 5 years. The Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, had just been passed in the United States. 50 million consumers need to be served insurance. Aetna is off record incomes and record profits. In the face of that, Bernalidi makes the courageous decision to blow the business up. He says there's a lot of change that will inevitably take place in this industry over the next 2 decades. You can either go into the fetal position and hope to be the last one standing, or you can systematically disaggregate and reinvent your business. In their case, taking their core business and moving from selling to companies to consumers and creating a new business around healthcare IT. The courage to choose. The clarity to focus. This isn't about hundreds or thousands of flowers blooming. This is like John F. Kennedy standing before Congress in 1961 and pronouncing, "We are going to send a man to the moon and importantly bring him back by the end of the decade." Choosing those few careful opportunities where you can do something interesting. Now, the important part about choosing what you do is to also choose what you don't do. I'm going to play another video showing Mark Parker from Nike describing some advice that he got from the late, great Steve Jobs from Apple.
Last night when we were having dinner, when you first got the job as CEO, you got a call from Steve Jobs and he offered you some advice.
Well, he didn't call to offer me advice, but we had worked together on a Nike-Apple collaboration called Nike Plus. So we took what Apple knows, what Nike knows, and brought a new technology to the market. Anyway, long story short, he said, "Hey, congratulations, it's great, you're going to do a great job." I said, "Well, do you have any advice?" And he said, "No, you're great." And then there was a pause, and he goes, "Well, I do have some advice." He goes, "Nike makes some of the best product in the world. I mean, product that you lust after, absolutely beautiful, stunning product. But you also make a lot of crap." He said, "Just get rid of the crappy stuff and focus on the good stuff." And then I expected a little pause and a laugh, but there was a pause but no laugh at the end. And he was absolutely right. And in fact, that's one of my major focal points in terms of my priorities as a CEO and even as a designer when I was growing up at the company, is to edit. I mean, we have so many ideas. Nike is an idea factory.
Just cut out the crappy stuff and focus on the good stuff. The most important word in strategy always has been and always will be no. The clarity to focus. Then you need the curiosity to explore, even if the probable outcome of any individual idea is failure. In my career, I've seen hundreds, if not thousands of ideas. Ideas from big companies, from startup companies, from my own company. They're all the same. Every idea to innovate, to drive new growth, is partially right and partially wrong. You cannot discover truth through analysis. This is the bias we have in large companies. We go and run analyses, we talk to customers, we do focus groups, we come up with very elaborate financial forecasts, we get alignment, and then we go and confidently launch our idea, only to learn a life lesson taught by the great American philosopher, actor, and boxer Mike Tyson, who once said everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. The punch you receive is the plan that looks great on paper ends up not being true in reality. There's an assumption that you missed. You need to have the curiosity to fumble and try and do different things to let the right idea emerge out of a marketplace. Now, organizations naturally are not curious places. Humans are, but organizations are not. If you truly want to make your organization more curious, it's hard work. You have to approach it at a systematic level. People don't like that. They look for the silver bullet answer, which is why you sometimes see organizations do things like this.
I'm here to get you all fired up about innovation. Are you fired up? Fired up. Are you fired up? I'm fired up! I said, are you fired up? Yes! Why are you fired up?
I have an idea.
It's based on a true story. We were working with a client. We were advising them about how to make their culture more curious. We said, you got to do all these things. They said, that sounds hard. They removed us as their consultant of record, brought in a creativity consultant who said the answer lay in spandex. have all the top leaders dress up as superheroes and show the company it was a new day when it comes to innovation. These kinds of things predictably have no impact. Today, the only thing that company is happy about is this is before the era of someone's pointing at someone who might have a costume that they want to share with people later on. This is before the era of ubiquitous camera phones. There's no photographic evidence that this actually happened. You need to do a lot of work to encourage curiosity. One thing I suggest you do is borrow from what is pictured here. This is Tata Sons, the largest conglomerate in India. As part of a coherent, consistent system of innovation, every couple years they give out a prize called Dare to Try. As the name connotes, this goes to someone or to a team that tried something that did not work, but learned something during the process. When they gave out the award last year, more than 300 different teams applied for it, a very clear signal that curiosity is rewarded. Final point, the conviction to persevere at predictable moments of truth. This is really hard stuff. The chart here is the net income from Clark Gilbert's business. The blue represents, the light blue, the historical core business. The dark blue are some of the reinventions he did in the core. The green is the new growth business. You play or look at the whole snapshot here, and you see a business that grew substantially. But as you go along the journey, there are predictable crises. In the beginning, you have crises of commitment. Are you serious about this? Are you willing to stay the course when the initial results aren't coming? In the middle, you have crises of conflict as the old and new begin to really fight against each other. At the end, you have crises of identity. Who are you as an organization? Who were you? Who are you becoming? This is incredibly hard stuff. It's why Gilbert says this is the hardest problem in business today. Because you've got to reinvent today. You've got to create tomorrow. You have to thoughtfully link those two. You have to have courage and clarity and curiosity and conviction. Incredibly hard stuff. This is my view. That's my bobblehead known as Skoda. That's a story for another day. My view is this is the greatest opportunity you will ever see. Disruption indeed transforms markets, but it always creates net growth. Think about photography. Eastman Kodak is a historical market leader that goes bankrupt in 2012. At its peak, it sold about 80 billion units of silver halide film. Kodak goes bankrupt, the world does not stop taking pictures. In fact, it takes more pictures than it ever did before, many times over. Of course, you do different things with pictures. You're posting them online, Snapchat, and other places. The business model changes, but the growth is there. Or in the newspaper business. Is this a declining business? This is $1 trillion worth of value created in the United States alone from companies that didn't exist in 1994. The opportunities are there if you look in the right way. Those of you squaring that Yahoo number with the price that it announced its sale at this week, that was only Yahoo's internet assets, its stake in Alibaba and Yahoo Japan's another $40 billion. So it's actually higher than that number there. So it all comes down to this picture here. This is my last slide. I'll take questions not now, put them in the app, and I'll try to answer a few of them during the panel discussion. Anyone recognize what movie this is? Shawshank Redemption, a movie that is near and dear to my heart, also in 1994 where I began my story. So those of you who haven't seen the movie, let me take you to this scene here. The lead character here, Andy Dufresne, played by Tim Robbins, is in a prison. He was accused of murdering his wife. He didn't do it. In the scene here, he had just gotten out of solitary confinement. Hope would appear to be lost. The corrupt warden had just assassinated the person who had evidence that would exonerate him. He's talking to his friend Red, played by Morgan Freeman. Red assumes he's got to console Andy. He starts talking about how everything's going to be okay. Andy starts talking about how he's going to bust out of Shawshank, how he's going to go to this crazy little town in Mexico. Red says, you can't allow yourself to think this way. You're going to drive yourself crazy. There will be Reds as you go through your journey of dual transformation. There will be voices of doubt. It could be members of your leadership team. It could be board members. It could be customers. There'll be people who will tell you, stick to your knitting, stay close to the core. When you hear those voices of doubt, when they exist in your own head too, remember what Andy said next. The way I see it, Red, it comes down to a choice. Get busy living or get busy dying. I hope you choose wisely. Good luck and thank you.